In section 4, we left off at connecting our steps together to create a flow which will host the future weather data that will be retrieved from an API. As we previewed the flow of the week weather feature, we could say stopped by an edit link that we added to the lookup weather step. To get around this, one method we can use is a precondition. Preconditions are business logic which is used before a resource is loaded or executed. They can be applied in numerous places around the Beekeeper platform. They can be used to be added to a create or an edit link before it is available, or they can be added to a business rule before it's executed. Preconditions can even be added to some field settings on a property inside a step. In this case, we'll be using a precondition to set a numerical counter to a create link. This will enable us to use the value of that counter to continue on to the next step in the week weather business feature. In this case, it will be day 1. So once we have added our preconditions to the step, we want the end user to continue on, and we need to create a new business rule that the precondition will be used against. This rule will then set the counter inside our state. Let's put this into practice. Start by creating a new property called weather step counter, camel case, and make it a number. Switch back to App Builder by clicking on the week weather business feature as a shortcut, as what we mentioned before. Now let's add a value to the counter. To do that, we are going to create our first business rule. Business rules are in Beekeeper are an adaptation of Blockly, a visual block programming tool allowing users to create complex business logic which can be easily implemented into their solutions. Once inside the lookup weather step, select the create link and click on add service. So adding a service basically allows you to connect to different areas of service integration in Beekeeper. Various types of services which are basically sourced from different locations and can be added to either create or edit links. For this service, name it Start Counter. Select the service type drop down to view the options too, and we can also see that we have 4 options here. We have API call, a service which will connect to endpoints or an endpoint inside a Shadow Connect file. We will go over what a Shadow Connect file is later on in this guide. The next service option will be an external business rule or external business rules, which are basically business rules that are imported from an external source. Third one will be product search microservice, which is basically an integration with an external API such as a product search index. And the final one will be a business rule. Okay, so just to recap, a business rule is a rule containing scalable logic which can be used for a multitude of different business purposes. So for now, let's select business rule and click on the add new rule button. Here we have the visual editor screen, and you may be familiar with the terms of the different blocks available as soon as you look at them, as they pretty much correspond to their programming term counterparts. For now, we are going to use a number block from the math group and also a variable block from the variables group. You can also have a look at other blocks just to familiarize yourself, as they may be helpful later on in this guide. But for now, start by selecting the variables group and drag and drop the step state choose property to value block to the canvas on the right. Next, select the math group and drag the first block, a number block, and place it in the canvas, or you can also place it directly inside your variable block. To get rid of unwanted blocks, you can simply drag and drop the block into the bin icon. Right click on the block will also give you more options. If you don't want to use the visual tool for the step, you can also switch to the code editor to edit your rule in CodeView. But currently, switching back to the visual editor will wipe out your current building blocks. My recommendation is to use the visual tool, but feel free to use a coding or code editor option where necessary. Now, on the set state block, replace the truth property to the weather step counter property that we created earlier, and inside that number block, enter 0, which is basically the start of the counter. Click on OK to save. Remember that edit link that we added to this link earlier? As a recap, edit links allow us to edit our data that we posted through our create link. That will mean that the create link will be used at least once. So we want to track this behavior, and one way to do this is by incrementing a value in our state. And this will be the case for our weather step counter property. Let's add another business rule, but this time on our edit link. Again, the service type will be a business rule, and just as before, we will be using the set state block from the variable block group and the number block from the math group. Drop the number block inside the set state block, but this time enter 1, as in the value 1, as the value. Click OK to save. The actions of adding a business rule on both our create and edit links in the lookup weather step basically summarize so far to number 1, adding a value of 0 to our counter once the create link is available, and number 2 will be changing or incrementing the value to 1 once the edit link is available. Okay, now that we have our business rule on our first step in our weak weather business feature, we need to tell App Engine that we are happy that the user has been given a chance to enter their location and also edit their location. And also notice that we haven't added any validation to the my location field yet, because App Engine obviously doesn't know what's right or what's wrong at this stage, but we'll get back to that. And also we are basically telling App Engine that once the user has made their first submission, make the edit link unavailable. And by doing that, it will theoretically stop the edit link from showing or stop the journey from looping. The actions of adding a business rule on both our create and edit links in the lookup weather step basically summarize so far to number 1, adding now that we have our business rule to our first step in our week weather business feature, we need to tell App Engine that changing we are happy that the user has been given a chance to enter their location once and also edit their location. And also notice that we haven't added any validation to the my location field yet, because App Engine obviously doesn't know what's right or what's wrong at this stage, but we'll get back to that. And also we are basically telling App Engine that once the user has made their first submission, a great way to switch off edit statement is truth by making by doing that. Ideally, we want to do this as early as possible, and we are doing this by adding a precondition to stop the journey. For example, we want to make the edit link in this step unavailable when the weather step counter is not equal to its original value of 0. And if you remember how we initially set this on our business rule on our create link. To do this, select the precondition box and the visual editor model will pop up again. You may now notice that we have a predefined empty if statement block and less group or blocks available than the business rule, which is not a problem as the business rule enables more functionality for its own use cases. So we want to say that if the weather step counter is equal to 0, then make the link available. Select the logic option and drag the equals block to the canvas. You can also change the operators in the drop-down menu in the middle of the block. Leave it in the equals option or is equals option and drag a number block inside the equals block and enter 0 as the value. Click OK, and also for future reference, business rules and preconditions or expressions that you have created inside your application will be available to select through a drop-down list while adding a precondition, or they can be managed through the rules section of Data Editor. So I know this may be a lot to take in, but again, to recap, we have told the create link, well, we basically told the create link to set the counter to 0, only once available. Prior to our addition of our precondition on the edit link, there was no logic to tell App Engine that we wanted to make the edit link unavailable at some point. So we told the edit link to set the counter to 1 once available. Now that we have added a precondition to the edit link, App Engine will not show the edit link if the counter is not equal to 0, as the business rule on the edit link updated it or incremented it to the value of 1. Which means that it is now no longer available, and it will stop the edit link from looping on itself, allowing the user to continue the journey that we desire. So with App Engine, it will provide us with options to create, as in post, and edit, as in put, in order for us to edit that behavior of what's presented to us in preview, or what could be presented to the user on the front end. We need to add preconditions and business rules. So hopefully you've understood a bit more on business rules and preconditions, but we will continue more with this in the next few sections. Actually, before we continue, one thing you can do is optionally make our next step of the journey, which is day 1, unavailable by using a precondition on the create link, such as if weather step counter is equal to 1, then the link is available. But leaving the create link without a precondition at this point should be perfectly fine too. Now let's preview our changes. We are expected to not basically get stuck by our edit link this time. Enter your location into the My Location field, and the edit link on the lookup weather step should kick in, allowing us to change our location once before the edit link on the business rule, or the business rule on the edit link, kicks in. You should also see the day 1 step 2, which is showing because it has no precondition, so they are both available. Click on the lookup weather, the purple step, and enter your location again. And realistically, we can enter anything here since we haven't added no or any validation on this field. And you should now no longer see the edit link. Only the day 1 step is now available, and we are happy to continue the flow from there. You will notice that the day 1 step has no fields, even though we previously added an object to the properties into the profile of the step earlier. But once we hit submit, we are back to the day 1 step, as in we've gone back to the same position that we started in. So why can't we continue to the day 2 step? Well, we do need to tell App Engine our methodology through logic, otherwise it will just give us what's possible at the time, as in it'll give us an option to post, and it'll also give us an option to put or edit. Remember, the preview journey and the end journey in a production environment will most likely be different. What the client may want, it should be or could be completely different to what we can see in the Beekeeper preview. So what the preview is showing us is not necessarily what we want to happen, and of course this will be in our hands to use preconditions and business rules to change this. So in section 5.2, which is entitled Network, we'll explain what we need to do next in order to proceed. Back in section 4.2, we created a flow by connecting the lookup weather, the step, the day 1 step, the day 2 step, and all the way to the day 5 step altogether. Once we reach the day 1 step and click submit, the day 1 step's create link still remained available. So now let's preview again, but this time let's have a look at the network tab by clicking on the grey bar below. We can see the requests and responses being made to and from App Engine here. So the first request should be a GET request to the App Engine's API. And now go back and click on the weak weathers feature and enter your location, this time into the My Location field. As you can now see, a post request has been created with the request object hosting your submission. This post request is created by our create link on the lookup weather step. Now that step should have been changed from green to purple, indicating that the edit link is now available. Enter your location again, and now a put request should have been sent to the API, indicating that you've now edited your initial submission. In order to explain the next part of this section, let's edit all 5 day steps and make the current location property third party for now. We'll switch it back to user defined later on. Now this time, select the day 1 step and you will now have noticed that the only possible action here is to submit. Click on the submit button and have a look at the post request 2. Again, we could check that by looking at the network tab by clicking on the grey bar once in preview on the left hand side. The reason why we cannot progress to our intended step day 2 is because we aren't submitting anything, as in you can see on the bottom right hand side, nothing is there. Since we cannot create an empty resource, we will need to add at least one property on this step. Let's now exit the preview and head into data editor. Create a new property called like weather, camel case, and make it a boolean this time. Boolean properties are automatically converted to checkboxes in the front end and also in a preview environment. So once you preview Beekeeper, once you've added a Boolean property to the steps data profile, you can see that it is now a checkbox ready for it to be ticked or unticked. So this checkbox will be based on the question, which is, are you happy with today's weather? And the result of this question will determine if the journey will be to end here or continue on. For now, let's edit the day 1 step in App Builder and drag the like weather property to the data profile. Make it user defined and then save. Return to App Builder and preview to see the changes. Once you've now submitted your location in the step, have a look around at the network tab again and you should now see a post request containing your location, yet you've now arrived on the day 2 step. Great! Let's add another property to our step, day 2, but this time we are going to change the current flow to make it more interesting, and our first task towards doing this will be to create one more string property called go today, as in camel case again. Before we save, select the validation tab, then enumeration. In Beekeeper, we can use enumeration to create options on a drop-down list on the front end. We are presented with a search bar, also in the preview as well. So you can see the drop-down list on the front end and also in the preview. We are presented with a search bar, but nothing is currently searchable because we haven't defined any values here. And we could do that by defining values inside the ARD, or in other words, application reference data. We basically want to give an option for the end user to choose between going to day 3, day 4 now, or day 5. The ARD section will allow us to define a list that we can use inside the enumeration section of our go today property. So we can save this property for now and we'll touch more on the section of data editor later on. But to visit the application reference data section for now, select the ARD tab in the top menu of data editor, then select add new list. Okay, for this list, let's give it a name. Let's call it week weather steps. The description, you can name it steps of the week. The type will be a string, and the values presented will be day 3 weather, day 4 weather, and day 5 weather. Once you've added those values, click Save. Return to the Go to Day property settings inside the Data Editor section and reselect the enumeration once you're inside the Go to Day property. The enumeration bit will be a toggle. You should now select or see a green item of the list that you've just created. Click to select it, then click Save. Repreview our model and reach step 2 by entering the information. And what do we see here? You may have guessed it already. We added a property, but we forgot to add the property to the day 2 step, so we cannot see anything. Let's do this now by editing the day 2 step in App Builder, then drag the Go to Day property and make it user defined. Save the step, and once you've done that, re-preview. Once you've re-previewed, reach the step again, and now you should see a drop-down menu with the values that we just added from the ARD. Also confirming that we can now post data to the create link, or through our create link. In the next video, section 5.3, which is called making our flow conditional, we will build our flow based on the options in our day 2 step. So based on our drop-down values that we've entered into the ARD. Alright, so this video will now focus on making our flow conditional. But a quick tip before we start, we can quickly edit our business rule names by double clicking on the green box under a step, then editing the name in the field at the top of the visual editor. So for example, let's make this business rule on the lookup weather step more memorable by changing the name to set weather step counter to 0. Okay, back to making our flow more conditional. Our new flow will follow this route. So it will be first look up weather, then you should go to the day 1 step, then it will be the day 2 step, but the remainder, day 3, day 4, and day 5 will be optional based on a drop down selection option on the day 2 step. The user will have an option to select where or which step they want to go to, or basically which day they want to go to based on the weather. And we can do that by editing the flow. So let's start by creating a different flow from the editing week weather feature. And we can break the connection between the steps now by clicking on the X in the middle of a line. Of course, you do need to be on the features main page for you to do this. Let's break the connection now between the day 3 to the day 4 step and the day 4 step to the day 5 step. Okay, now it's your turn, and we want to allow the user to optionally go for day 3, day 4, or day 5 through the selection on the day 2 step. Here's the exercise. Alright, so exercise 3, adding preconditions. You should be familiar with the concept of preconditions as we've explored this session already. But this time, I'm going to get you to do it on the day 3, the day 4, and the day 5 step. So here's the exercise. So firstly, I want you to create a precondition on the day 3 step, only allowing the link to be available if the property go today equals day 3 weather. So it has to equal what we've entered into the ARD. The same should apply for day 4 and day 5. So create a precondition on the day 4 step, allowing the link to be available if the property go today equals day 4 weather. And finally, create a precondition on the day 5 step, allowing the link to be available if the property go today equals day 5 weather. And here's a tip before you do it. Enumerations are still strings. So pause, and once you're ready, click continue to resume. Okay, hope you enjoyed that exercise, but here is my solution. The first thing I did was select the precondition checkbox, and obviously to do that we need to create a new precondition, so we had to click on the add new rule box. The visual editor box opened and I named it if user wants to go to day 3 for the first part, and for the blocks I chose a equals block, I chose a variance block which is the property block, and I chose a string block which is basically gonna merge together as an equals comparison block. So to make that easy, I first took the equals block, I dragged it into the if statement. I then took the property block, dragged it to the left-hand section of the statement, and I took the string block and dragged it to the right-hand section of the equal statement. Basically, this should read if property, which is go to day, is equals to day 3 weather, and the way we formatted it in the ARD should be exactly the same how you format the string here. So once that rule, once that statement has been created, it will basically follow the rule if go today is equal to day 3 weather, or in the real world, if the user selects from the drop down day 3 weather, take me to the day 3 step. Once it does that, then we should be complete. I then repeated it for day 4 and day 5. And at the end, well, we'll see what happens next. Alright, so let's test our preconditions by re-previewing. If everything is correct, day 3, day 4, and day 5 should all be accessible conditionally through the drop-down list on the day 2 step. If there are steps showing that shouldn't be showing, I mean, they shouldn't really matter too much now, but if you're like me and you want to see why this is showing or why this is not showing, feel free to play around with the preconditions and the business rules to make it unavailable or available. Once we've added the required preconditions, you should be able to see the flow or optional flow from day 2 to day 3, or optionally to day 4, or optionally to day 5, even after we broke the connected lines earlier in the UI section of our week weather feature. Pretty cool, right? In the next session, we will mainly explore more of data editor's functionalities,